The summer dust of 1878 turned everything in Sweetwater, Texas, the color of old parchment. But the woman sitting beneath the cottonwood tree seemed untouched by the grime, her fingers moving with such precision through the horsehair that Jake Morrison found himself stopping his work just to watch her for the third time that week. She had arrived in town 2 months earlier on the eastbound stage, carrying nothing but a worn leather satchel and eyes that held secrets Jake could not begin to fathom. Her name was Elena Ashworth, and she had taken up residence in the small house behind the general store, the one that had sat empty since old Mrs. Henderson passed the previous winter. Within days, folks noticed her peculiar habit of collecting horsehair from the hitching posts, the stable, anywhere a horse had rubbed against wood or metal and left behind strands of mane or tail. She would gather the hair carefully, sorting it by color and texture, washing it in the creek that ran behind her property, then spending hours in the shade braiding it into rope with a patience that seemed almost supernatural. Jake was the foreman of the Double R Ranch, a spread of 3,000 acres that ran cattle from the Brazos River bottomland up into the Rocky Hills, where rattlesnakes outnumbered people 10 to 1. He was 26 years old, broad-shouldered from years of hard work, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that curled at his collar no matter how often he cut it. He had been raised on the ranch after his parents died of fever when he was barely 12, taken in by old Randall Pierce, who owned the spread and treated him like the son he never had. Jake knew cattle and horses, knew the land and the sky, could read weather in the wind and trouble in the set of a man's shoulders. But he had never known anything quite like the feeling that overtook him when he watched Elena work. Every day around noon, when the sun was at its highest and most punishing, Jake would ride into town on some errand or another. Sometimes he actually needed supplies. Other times he invented reasons, telling himself he was checking on a fence order or picking up mail that had not yet arrived. But the truth was simpler and more complicated than any excuse he could manufacture. He came to see her. Elena would be in her spot beneath the cottonwood, her skirts spread around her like petals, her fingers never stopping their intricate dance through the horsehair. She worked without looking down most of the time, her eyes focused on some distant point only she could see, and Jake wondered what she was thinking about. What memories or dreams occupied her mind while her hands created something useful and beautiful from what others considered waste. "You are back again," she said one afternoon without looking up, startling him so badly his horse sidestepped beneath him. Jake cleared his throat, feeling heat rise in his face that had nothing to do with the Texas sun. Needed to pick up some harness repair supplies. "The blacksmith is 2 streets over." Her voice carried the faintest hint of amusement, a melody that reminded Jake of creek water over stones. He dismounted, tying his horse to the post nearby, and walked closer. "Mind if I watch for a spell?" Elena looked up then, really looked at him, and Jake felt the full force of those gray-green eyes that seemed to shift color depending on the light. "You have been watching for weeks now. What is it you are hoping to see?" "How you do it," Jake said honestly, gesturing to the rope taking shape in her hands. "I have been working with horses my whole life, and I have never seen anyone make rope from their hair like that. Must take incredible patience." Something flickered across her face, an emotion too quick for Jake to identify. "Patience is all I have had for a very long time." She shifted slightly, making room in the shade. "Sit, if you wish. Your standing there like a fence post makes my neck ache from looking up." Jake sat, removing his hat and setting it beside him. Up close, he could see the intricate pattern of her work, the way she twisted 3 strands together, then added a 4th for strength, her fingers moving in a rhythm that must have been born from countless hours of practice. The rope she was creating was perhaps 20 feet long already, coiled neatly beside her. "Where did you learn this?" he asked. Elena's hands paused for just a moment before resuming their work. "My mother taught me. She learned from her mother, who learned from hers." We come from a long line of women who understood that the world wastes nothing if you are willing to see value where others see only scraps. She pulled another strand from the pile beside her, examining it for length and quality before incorporating it into her braid. These ropes are stronger than most people think. They can hold weight, bind things together. They do not break easily. Why horsehair specifically? Because horses are noble creatures, strong and loyal. Their hair carries that strength even after it has been shed. Elena glanced at him, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. And because it is readily available in a town like this, where everyone seems to own at least one horse. Jake laughed, the sound surprising him with its ease. He rarely laughed, had grown serious in the years since he had taken on the responsibility of helping run the Double R. But something about Elena made him feel lighter, as if the weight he carried daily had lessened just from sitting in her presence. "What do you do with the rope once you have made it?" he asked. "Sell it, mostly. The general store takes it, and I have had orders from some of the ranchers for special lengths. I made a set of reins last month for Dr. Patterson's buggy horse." She held up the section she was working on, showing him the tight, even braiding. "It is honest work, and it keeps my hands busy. Keeps your mind busy too, I would wager," Jake said softly. Elena's eyes met his again, and this time he saw something deeper there, a well of sadness that seemed bottomless. "Yes," she said simply. "It does that as well." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, Jake watching her work, Elena focused on the rope growing beneath her fingers. A freight wagon rumbled past, kicking up dust. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. The normal sounds of Sweetwater went on around them, but in the shade of the cottonwood tree, Jake felt separate from all of it, existing in a small pocket of peace he had not known he was searching for. "I should let you get back to your work," Elena said eventually, though her tone suggested she was in no particular hurry for him to leave. "I suppose I should actually go to the blacksmith," Jake admitted, retrieving his hat. He stood, brushing dust from his pants, then hesitated. "Would you mind if I came by again? To watch, I mean. I find it mighty interesting, what you do." Elena looked up at him, and for the first time since he had met her, he saw a genuine smile break across her face, transforming her from merely pretty to absolutely beautiful. "I would not mind at all, Jake Morrison, though you might want to actually conduct your business first so you do not have to lie about why you are in town." Jake felt his ears burn at being so thoroughly called out, but he grinned anyway. "Yes, ma'am, I will do that." As he rode toward the blacksmith, Jake found himself already planning his next trip to town, already anticipating the sight of Elena beneath her tree, her patient hands working their small magic. He did not fully understand what drew him to her, but he was beginning to realize it was more than simple curiosity about her craft. There was something about her self-sufficiency, her quiet strength, the way she created beauty from things others overlooked, that called to something deep in his chest. That night at the ranch, Jake found himself distracted during dinner, pushing his food around his plate while his mind wandered back to town, to gray-green eyes and horsehair rope and a smile that had hit him like a kick from a green-broke colt. "You feeling poorly?" Randall Pierce asked, his weathered face creasing with concern. The old rancher was in his 60s now, his hair white as cotton and his hands gnarled from a lifetime of hard work, but his eyes were still sharp as a hawk's. "No, sir, just thinking. About that gal in town, I would wager." Randall's eyes twinkled with amusement. "You think I have not noticed you riding in 3-4 times a week lately? We got enough supplies stockpiled to last through winter at the rate you have been going." Jake had the grace to look embarrassed. "She is different, Randall." "I cannot quite explain it. Do not have to explain love, son. Just have to follow it and see where it leads." Randall took a long drink of his coffee, then set the cup down with a decisive thunk. "But maybe you ought to actually talk to her more instead of just watching her work like she is some kind of exhibition." "We talked today," Jake protested. "Had a real nice conversation. Good, that is a start." Randall leaned back in his chair. "What do you know about her?" Where she came from, why she is here. Jake realized with a start that he knew almost nothing about Elena beyond her name and her unusual craft. I suppose I do not know much, he admitted. Might want to remedy that. Cannot build something real with a person if you do not know who they are beneath the surface. Randall stood, collecting his plate. I am heading to bed. You got the early patrol tomorrow, checking the north fence line. Yes, sir. But Jake did not sleep well that night, his mind too full of questions and the memory of Elena's smile. When dawn broke gray and cool, promising another scorcher once the sun climbed higher, he was already up and ready to ride, eager to lose himself in work while he figured out how to learn more about the woman who had captured his attention so completely. The next few weeks fell into a pattern that Jake found both frustrating and deeply satisfying. Every few days, he would make the ride into Sweetwater, conducting whatever legitimate business needed doing, then finding his way to the cottonwood tree where Elena worked. They would talk while she braided, conversations that ranged from the mundane to the profound, and slowly, piece by piece, Jake began to understand the woman behind the patient hands. Elena had come from Louisiana originally, from a small town outside of New Orleans where she had lived with her mother and younger sister. Her father had died in the war, one of thousands of casualties that had reshaped the nation and left countless families fractured. She spoke little of her mother's death 3 years earlier, and even less about why she had left her home and traveled west, but Jake could read the grief in the set of her shoulders when certain topics arose. My sister married a merchant, Elena told him one afternoon in early August when the heat was so oppressive that even the cicadas seemed too tired to sing. A good man who treats her well. They have a son now, almost a year old. I have never met him. Why did you not stay? Jake asked, then immediately worried he had overstepped. I am sorry, that is not my business. No, it is a fair question. Elena's fingers never stopped their work, pulling and twisting the horsehair with practiced ease. I stayed as long as I was needed, helped raise my sister after Mama passed. But once she was married and settled, I felt like I was intruding on the life she was building, and I needed to find my own path, my own purpose. She paused, her eyes distant. There was also a man who would not take no for an answer. He was persistent in his courtship, and his family had money and influence. It became clear that staying would lead to a marriage I did not want, to a life that would suffocate me, so I left. Jake felt a surge of protectiveness so strong it surprised him. Did he hurt you? Not in the way you mean. But there are many ways to hurt someone, Jake. He was convinced I would change my mind, that I simply did not understand what was good for me. He could not fathom that a woman might want something different than what he offered. Elena looked at Jake directly, her expression fierce. I will never let anyone make my choices for me again. I would rather live alone, making rope in the shade, than be trapped in a cage made of money and social expectations. I understand that, Jake said quietly. The need to live on your own terms. It is why I have stayed at the Double R instead of trying to start my own spread. Randall gave me a home when I had nothing, treated me like family. Walking away to chase my own ambitions felt like betrayal, even though he has told me 100 times he would stake me if I wanted my own place. Elena smiled, a softer expression than her usual careful neutrality. We are both bound by loyalty then, just in different ways. You to the man who raised you, me to the promise I made to myself to stay free. As summer deepened and the days grew longer, Jake found himself inventing more and more reasons to ride into town. He started bringing Elena things he thought she might need. A new knife with a sharper blade for cutting the horsehair, a wide-brimmed hat to provide better shade, a canteen of cool water from the ranch's deep well. She accepted these gifts with a mixture of gratitude and wariness, as if unsure what he expected in return. I do not want you to think I am courting you for any reason other than I enjoy your company, Jake told her one afternoon, when she had seemed particularly hesitant about accepting a small basket of peaches from the ranch's trees. I am not that man from Louisiana. I will never be that man. Elena took the basket, her fingers brushing his for just a moment, sending electricity up Jake's arm. I know you are not. If I thought you were, I would not let you sit here day after day. But Jake, you should understand that I am not looking for a husband. I did not come west to trade one cage for another, even if the new one comes with kind eyes and thoughtful gifts. What if I am not offering a cage? Jake asked. What if I am just offering myself as I am, with no expectations beyond seeing where this leads? She studied him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face for something. Whatever she found must have satisfied her, because her expression softened. Then you may continue bringing me peaches, Jake Morrison, and I will continue letting you watch me work. It was not a declaration of love, not even an admission of interest beyond friendship, but it was enough. Jake took what she offered and was grateful for it, content to sit in her shade and marvel at her patience, both with the rope she created and with him. The turning point came in September, when the oppressive heat finally broke and the first hints of autumn touched the air. Jake had ridden into town to pick up supplies for the fall roundup, which would begin in a few weeks and require every hand on the ranch working dawn to dusk. He found Elena in her usual spot, but something was different. Her hands were still, the rope lying abandoned in her lap, and her face was pale with worry. What is wrong? Jake was off his horse and beside her in an instant, his hand on her shoulder. Elena looked up at him, and he saw fear in her eyes that made his stomach clench. There was a man here earlier, asking questions about me. He spoke with Mr. Peterson at the general store, showed him a photograph, asked if anyone matching my description had come through town. The man from Louisiana. Jake felt anger rise hot and sharp in his chest. His brother, I think. The description fits. Elena's hands twisted together, crushing the horsehair rope. I thought I had come far enough, been gone long enough, that he would give up, but it seems I was wrong. Jake knelt beside her, taking her cold hands in his. Did this man see you? Does he know you are here? I do not think so. I saw him from a distance and hid in Mrs. Patterson's shop until he left, but Mr. Peterson knows me. If the man comes back and asks more questions, it will not take long for him to find out where I live. Her voice shook, the careful control she always maintained finally cracking. I will have to leave. I will have to run again. No. The word came out harder than Jake intended, but he did not soften it. You are not running anymore, Elena, not alone anyway. She stared at him, confusion and hope warring in her expression. What are you saying? I am saying that if you need to leave Sweetwater, then we will figure out where you go next. And I am saying that I will not let anyone force you into a life you do not want. Jake squeezed her hands gently. I am also saying, if you will hear me out, that there might be another option. What option? Jake took a deep breath, knowing he was about to risk everything, but knowing just as surely that he had no choice. Marry me. Elena jerked back, pulling her hands from his. Jake, no, you do not have to do that. You do not have to sacrifice yourself to save me. Who said anything about sacrifice? Jake stayed where he was, letting her have space but holding her gaze. Elena, I have been coming to this tree every few days for months now. I have watched you work, talked with you, learned who you are beneath the mystery that first drew me in. And somewhere along the way, I stopped coming because I was curious and started coming because I could not imagine my day without seeing you. I'm not asking you to marry me out of some misguided sense of protection, though God knows I do want to protect you. I am asking because I love you. The words hung in the air between them, too big and too honest to take back. Elena's eyes filled with tears, though whether they were happy or sad, Jake could not tell. You love me, she repeated, as if testing the words. Yes, I love your patience and your strength. I love the way you create beautiful things from what others throw away. I love your fierce independence and your gentle hands, and the way you smile like it is something rare and precious that you only give to those who earn it. Jake shifted, his knees aching from kneeling on the hard ground, but he did not move away. And if you cannot love me back, I will accept that, but if you marry me, you will have my name and my protection. That man from Louisiana will have no claim on you. You will be free to make your ropes, to live as you choose, to keep that independence you value so much. I will never cage you, Elena. That is my promise." She was fully crying now, tears streaming down her face, and Jake felt panic rise in his chest. "Please do not cry. If I have upset you, I am sorry. Forget I said anything." "No," Elena laughed through her tears, a sound that was half sob, half joy. "No, you foolish man, these are not sad tears." She reached for him, cupping his face in her hands. "I thought I did not want this. I thought I was better off alone, that letting myself care for anyone would be a betrayal of the freedom I fought so hard to win. But these last months with you have taught me something important." "What is that?" "That there is a difference between being trapped and being loved. That real love does not diminish freedom, it expands it." Elena leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. "I cannot promise I will be an easy wife. I am stubborn and independent, and I will never stop making my ropes." "I would not want you to," Jake whispered. "Then yes, Jake Morrison. I will marry you. Not because I need saving, but because somewhere in all those hours you spent watching me work, I fell in love with you too." Jake kissed her then, a gentle pressing of lips that tasted of salt from her tears and promised everything he could not put into words. When they pulled apart, both breathless, Elena was smiling that rare, precious smile, and Jake felt like the luckiest man in all of Texas. They were married 3 days later in the small church at the edge of town, with Randall Pierce standing as witness and Mrs. Patterson playing the out-of-tune piano. Elena wore a simple blue dress and carried a bouquet of wildflowers Jake had picked that morning. The ceremony was brief, the words binding them together spoken by a circuit preacher who happened to be passing through on his monthly rounds. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Jake kissed his bride with a tenderness that made Mrs. Patterson dab at her eyes with her handkerchief. The man from Louisiana did come back, arriving in Sweetwater 4 days after the wedding. He was well-dressed and arrogant, exactly the type of person Jake had always distrusted, with cold eyes and a mouth that turned down in perpetual dissatisfaction. He asked more questions, made vague threats, and finally demanded to see Elena. Jake met him outside the general store, standing with his arms crossed and his expression hard. "Mrs. Morrison is not available to speak with you." "Mrs. Morrison?" The man's face flushed with anger. "That is impossible. Elena Ashworth is unmarried. I have papers from her sister confirming her status." "Elena Ashworth does not exist anymore," Jake said calmly. "Elena Morrison is my wife, legally married under Texas law. Whatever business you think you have with her is finished. You need to get back on your horse and ride out of this town." "You do not understand. My brother has claimed to her. They had an understanding." "I understand that no means no, and that your brother needs to learn to accept rejection." Jake took a step forward, using his height to his advantage. "Your brother has no claim on any woman who does not want him. Now I am going to ask you nicely one more time to leave. After that, I will stop being nice." The man must have seen something in Jake's eyes that convinced him further argument was futile, because he mounted his horse with ill grace and rode out of town, muttering threats that carried no real weight. Jake watched until he disappeared into the distance, then returned to the ranch where Elena was waiting, standing on the porch of the main house with her hands twisted together in worry. "He is gone," Jake told her, pulling her into his arms, "and he is not coming back." Elena sagged against him, relief making her knees weak. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest. "Thank you for standing between me and that life." "Always," Jake promised. "For as long as I draw breath, I will stand with you." They settled into married life with surprising ease, considering how quickly everything had happened. Elena moved into Jake's small house on the ranch property, a 3-room cabin that had been his home for the last 5 years. She brought her collection of horsehair and her tools, setting up a workspace on the porch where she could braid in the shade while keeping an eye on the ranch activities around her. Randall Pierce took to Elena immediately, charmed by her quiet competence and the way she could gentle a spooked horse with nothing but soft words and patient hands. "You picked well," he told Jake one evening while they were mending fence. "She has got steel in her spine and kindness in her heart. That is a rare combination." "I know how lucky I am," Jake replied, hammering a post into the ground with more force than necessary. "Love is not about luck, son. It is about recognizing something precious when you see it and having the courage to hold on." Randall tested the post, nodding approval. "You both had that courage. That is why it will work." The fall roundup came and went, a brutal 2 weeks of dawn-to-dusk work that left Jake exhausted and sore but satisfied. Elena would have dinner waiting when he stumbled home each night, and she would rub liniment into his aching muscles while he told her about his day. In the mornings, she would pack him food for the trail and kiss him goodbye with a tenderness that made the long hours bearable. When the work was done and the cattle were counted and branded, Jake took a rare day off. He found Elena on the porch, working on a new rope, her fingers moving in that mesmerizing pattern he had first fallen in love with months ago. "I never get tired of watching you do that," he said, settling into the chair beside her. Elena glanced at him, smiling. "Good, because I am not planning to stop anytime soon. Mrs. Henderson placed an order for 4 sets of reins and Dr. Patterson wants rope for his medical bag." "You are becoming the most sought-after rope maker in the county," Jake teased. "Someone has to put all this horsehair to good use." She held up the section she was working on, examining it critically. "Besides, I like the work. It gives me time to think, to process everything that has happened." Jake reached over, taking her free hand in his. "Any regrets?" "Not a single one." Elena laced her fingers through his. "I was so afraid of losing myself, of becoming someone else's property instead of my own person, but you never made me feel that way, Jake. Not once." "That is because you are not property. You are my partner, my equal. The day I forget that is the day I stop deserving you." Winter came cold that year, with frost painting the windows and ice forming on the water troughs. Elena continued her work inside, sitting by the fire while Jake read aloud from books they borrowed from the traveling library that made its rounds through the county. They celebrated their first Christmas together with Randall and some of the other ranch hands, a raucous affair involving too much food and terrible singing and laughter that echoed through the ranch house. In February, Elena told Jake she was pregnant. The news filled him with a joy so profound he could barely speak, could only hold her and thank God for blessing him beyond anything he deserved. Elena was more practical, already planning how she would continue her rope making as her belly grew, determined not to let pregnancy slow her down. "The women in my family work right up until the baby comes," she told him firmly when he suggested she rest more. "I am healthy and strong, and sitting idle would drive me mad." Jake learned not to argue, simply making sure she had everything she needed and trying not to hover too obviously. He watched her belly swell with their child, watched her hands continue their patient work with the horsehair, and marveled at her strength and determination. Their son was born in early October of 1879, arriving squalling into the world during a thunderstorm that shook the cabin and sent rain hammering against the roof. Dr. Patterson delivered him with Elena's sister-in-law assisting, while Jake paced outside like a caged animal until he heard the baby's first cry. When he was finally allowed in, he found Elena exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets she had made herself. "Meet your son," she said softly, holding the baby out to Jake. Jake took the child with trembling hands, staring down at the red, wrinkled face and feeling his heart expand in ways he had not known were possible. "He is perfect," he whispered. "He is loud," Elena corrected, laughing. "But yes, he is perfect." They named him Thomas after Jake's father, and Randall Pierce cried unashamedly when they told him, declaring himself the boy's unofficial grandfather on the spot. Thomas was a healthy baby, growing fast and strong, with his mother's gray-green eyes and his father's dark hair. Elena returned to her rope-making when Thomas was a month old, though now she worked with the baby sleeping in a basket beside her. one foot rocking it gently while her hands moved through the familiar patterns. Jake would come home to find them like that, mother and child in perfect harmony, and he would stand in the doorway just watching, overwhelmed by the love he felt for them both. Life settled into a new rhythm, one built around the needs of a growing child and the work of the ranch. Jake took on more responsibility as Randall aged, gradually assuming control of the day-to-day operations while the old rancher stepped back. Elena's rope-making business continued to grow, her reputation spreading beyond Sweetwater to neighboring towns. She had to hire help sometimes, teaching other women her craft so she could keep up with orders. When Thomas was 2, Randall Pierce died peacefully in his sleep, his heart simply giving out after more than 6 decades of hard use. He left the ranch to Jake in his will, along with a letter that made Jake weep when he read it. "You were the son I never had," Randall had written in his shaky handwriting. "You made my last years a joy. Take care of this land, and it will take care of you. Love that wife of yours and raise your children to be good people. That is all any of us can hope to do in this life." Jake buried Randall on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a spreading oak tree where the old man used to sit and watch the sunset. Elena stood beside him at the funeral, holding Thomas while Jake said his goodbyes, and when it was over, she took his hand and they walked back to their home together, a family united in grief and love. The Double R Ranch prospered under Jake's leadership. He was a fair boss, paying his hands well and treating them with respect, and in return they gave him loyalty and hard work. He expanded the herd gradually, buying good breeding stock and improving the quality of the cattle. Elena kept making her ropes, turning what had started as a solitary craft into a thriving business that employed half a dozen women and brought in a steady income. Their family grew too. A daughter arrived 3 years after Thomas, a tiny, fierce thing they named Grace after Elena's mother. Then another son 2 years later, whom they called Samuel. The cabin that had once seemed spacious now bulged at the seams, so Jake built a larger house, a proper ranch house with 4 bedrooms and a wide porch where Elena could work and watch the children play in the yard. Thomas grew up fascinated by the ranch, following his father everywhere and pestering the hands with endless questions about cattle and horses and how everything worked. Grace inherited her mother's patience and her clever hands, learning to braid rope before she could write her name. Samuel was the wild one, always climbing trees and chasing after trouble, keeping Elena constantly on her toes. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jake took Elena back to the cottonwood tree in Sweetwater where he had first watched her work. The town had grown over the years with new buildings and more people, but the tree remained, its branches spreading wide over the same patch of ground. "Do you remember the first time we talked here?" Jake asked, settling beside her in the shade. "Of course. You told me you were at the blacksmith for harness supplies and I called you on your lie." Elena smiled, the expression as bright as the day he had first earned it. "I knew you had been watching me for weeks. I just did not know why. I was trying to understand how you could be so patient, how you could sit here day after day doing such meticulous work without going mad from boredom." Jake reached over, taking her hand. "Now I know it was never about the rope, not really. It was about creating something beautiful and useful from what others discarded. It was about proving to yourself that you had value beyond what anyone else decided for you." Elena leaned her head on his shoulder. "You always understood me better than I understood myself. Even in the beginning, when I was so determined not to need anyone, you saw past my walls. I saw a woman braiding rope from horsehair she collected, and I marveled at her patience daily," Jake said softly. "I still marvel at you, Elena, every single day." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the town move around them, both lost in memories of how far they had come. From a chance meeting under a tree to a marriage built on respect and love, from 2 people guarding their independence to a family that had become the center of their world. "We should get back," Elena said eventually. "Grace will have questions about her arithmetic and Samuel will have destroyed something by now." Jake laughed, pulling her to her feet. Thomas can handle them for a while longer. He is becoming quite the responsible young man. He is 12. He is still a boy, no matter how grown up he acts. But Elena was smiling, pride evident in her voice. They rode back to the ranch together, sitting close on the wagon bench, and when they arrived home, it was to find exactly the chaos Elena had predicted. Samuel had indeed broken something, a window in the barn where he had been throwing stones, and Grace was patiently explaining to Thomas why his solution to her arithmetic problem was wrong. The house was loud and messy and perfect, filled with the sounds of life and love and family. That evening, after the children were in bed and the house was finally quiet, Elena settled on the porch with her rope making, her hands moving through the familiar patterns by lamplight. Jake joined her, content to watch as he had done so many times before, marveling at her patience, at the life they had built together, at the miracle of finding love in the most unexpected place. "What are you thinking about?" Elena asked without looking up, her fingers never pausing. "That I am the luckiest man alive," Jake replied honestly. "That I walked into town one day looking for nothing in particular and found everything I did not know I needed." Elena set down her work, reaching for his hand. "We found each other," she corrected gently. "And we had the courage to hold on, even when it would have been easier to let go." Jake pulled her close, kissing her temple. "I will never let go, Elena, not in this lifetime or any other." The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Thomas took over more of the ranch work as he grew older, showing the same instinct for the land that Jake possessed. Grace married at 20 to a schoolteacher from San Antonio, a gentle man who loved her fierce independence and supported her rope-making business, which she ran alongside her mother. Samuel joined the Texas Rangers for a few years, satisfying his need for adventure before returning home to help run the ranch, bringing with him a wife he had met in Austin and stories that kept the family entertained for hours. Jake and Elena grew old together, their hair turning gray, their hands becoming gnarled with arthritis, but their love never dimming. Elena still made rope, though her pace was slower now and her fingers sometimes fumbled what had once been automatic. Jake still watched her work, still marveled at her patience, still felt the same surge of love he had experienced that first day under the cottonwood tree. On a warm spring evening in 1903, when they were both in their 60s and surrounded by children and grandchildren, Elena set down her rope-making and took Jake's hand. "You have any regrets?" she asked, echoing the question he had posed so many years ago. Jake looked around at the ranch they had built together, at the family they had raised, at the woman who had been his partner through every joy and sorrow. "Not a single one," he said firmly. Only that we did not have more time," Elena replied softly. "But I suppose that is always the way with love. There is never enough time." "Then we will have to make the most of what we have left," Jake said, pulling her close. And they did, living out their remaining years in the house they had built, surrounded by the evidence of their love in every child, every grandchild, every rope braided from horsehair that Elena had collected with patient hands. They sat together on the porch most evenings, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in shades of orange and gold, holding hands and remembering all they had survived and created together. When Jake died quietly in his sleep at the age of 71, Elena grieved deeply, but without despair. She knew she had been blessed beyond measure, had found a love that many people spent their whole lives searching for and never discovered. She continued to make her ropes, her hands moving through the familiar patterns, and when people asked why she still bothered at her age, she would smile and say it kept her connected to something important, kept her hands busy and her heart full. Elena lived another 5 years after Jake's death, long enough to see all her grandchildren grown and several great-grandchildren born. When she passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1909, surrounded by family, they found her with a partially finished rope in her lap, her fingers still curved around the horsehair as if ready to resume her work. They buried her beside Jake on the hill overlooking the ranch, under the spreading oak tree where Randall Pierce had once watched the sunset. Her tombstone was simple, bearing her name and dates, but someone had laid a length of braided horsehair rope across it, a tribute to the patient woman who had turned discarded strands into something beautiful and lasting. The ranch continued under Thomas's capable management, passing eventually to his children, and then their children, becoming a legacy that stretched across generations. But the story people told most often, the one that became part of the ranch's history, was about the woman who braided rope from horsehair she collected, and the cowboy who marveled at her patience daily, and the love that grew between them beneath a cottonwood tree in Sweetwater, Texas. It was a love story as enduring as the land itself, a testament to the power of patience and the courage to open your heart even when fear tells you to guard it. It was a reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary things grow from the smallest beginnings, from horsehair and curiosity, and two people brave enough to take a chance on something neither of them had been looking for. And in the end, that was the greatest legacy Jake and Elena left behind, greater than the ranch or the business or even the family they had raised. They left behind proof that love, real love, does not cage or diminish or control. It sets free, it expands, it transforms ordinary lives into something remarkable. They showed that when two people come together as equals, respecting each other's independence while building something shared, they create a bond that nothing can break, not time, not distance, not even death itself. The Double R Ranch stood for over 100 years, weathering droughts and economic depressions, changing ownership but never losing the spirit of family and hard work that Jake and Elena had infused into every acre. And somewhere in the ranch house, carefully preserved in a glass case, was a length of rope braided from horsehair, a physical reminder of where it all began, of patient hands creating beauty from what others discarded, of a love that started with curiosity and grew into something eternal.